Hi everyone, my name is Amy Hanreddy, and this is a short 30-minute session for Club 21 called Distance Learning, We Can Do Hard Things Together. I am a professor of special education at Cal State Northridge and have been working with several other professionals and teachers on refining distance learning approaches for students with disabilities really since March. So I'm happy to share these with you today and hope that we can find something that will be helpful for you. So our goals here are first, just to face the barriers and acknowledge the hard things about distance learning. Second, to talk about some collaboration strategies and to give you some practical tools focused on how to work together in teams with educators and family members. And then finally, to give you some quick ideas and strategies that we think might be helpful. Okay, so we know that distance learning is hard. It's hard for everybody involved. So for teachers, we're learning new modalities, not just the technology, but also new strategies for teaching. And honestly, some teachers are picking it up more quickly than others. This is a learning process for everybody involved. We're learning to manage new systems. So again, it's not just the hardware, but it's also the variety of tools, particularly when delivering online instruction. There's a lot of navigating between different things at the same time, which is entirely different from teaching in a classroom. Teachers who have taught similar content for many years are now required to create entirely new content that is designed for a distance learning scenario. And then many of our teachers are, of course, juggling work and family. So family members are now not only providing 24-hour care for their kids, whereas previously kids received some of their care during school hours, but they're also really the main people facilitating school for their children. Families are also the ones who are really advocating for more accessible instruction for students with disabilities, and like teachers, are also juggling work and family. And then let's not forget the kids. Kids are learning new routines, are really struggling, some of them, with a lack of social interaction and social opportunities. Students with disabilities are receiving less of those professional supports, although I would argue that families provide some high quality support also, but we're really missing out on the expertise of all of those different team members who were previously providing direct service to students. And then also some students are really having difficulty navigating and accessing instruction in these new formats. So in March and April, shortly after distance learning started, with a team, I put together a survey to ask families what they were hoping to see in the distance learning programs for their children. And I wanted to share just a few of the results here. So first, when families were asked about their hopes for distance learning programs for their children, not surprising, many families really were focused on access to communication and literacy skills for their children, the emphasis on remaining connected with peers, continuing to develop academic skills, and also to remain connected with teachers. Some of the greatest challenges, as expected again, are the need to provide support to a child who might have some more significant or higher levels of support needs while managing other responsibilities. So that was overwhelmingly the greatest concern among the families surveyed. Also encouraging kids to participate in or complete school-provided activities, as well as personal fatigue, anxiety, and stress, and then materials that are not necessarily accessible or motivating to students. So then we gave families a list of items and asked which of these were most important to them in a distance learning program. So at the top of the list were those opportunities for live times to interact via phone or video conference. Next was receiving videos or updates to connect with their child. Then inclusion in general education, distance learning opportunities, and also interactive activities that family members could do with their kids at home, meaning things that are not necessarily just on a screen. So then when asked which of those things have actually been provided to their child, you can see that there's a little bit of a mismatch between the things that families wanted or that were important to them and the things that they had actually seen as part of their distance learning program. So at the top of the list, the most common activity or things that they were provided with are those online activities for students to do. And then after that, remember this was early in the distance learning programs, is that they were receiving packets or worksheets for their child to complete. Only about a third of families at that time had been participating in live class meetings, and also about a third of families were engaging in interactive activities that they could do with their child at home. Now we're starting to see some of this changing as we've moved into the fall semester, and the state of California has provided some more guidance with a big emphasis on live instruction for online programs for students, but that also comes with a cost, right? We'll talk about that. So when we consider what distance learning is, this is just kind of a chart to give us an overview of the different possible components of distance learning. You can see up at the top is that portion that I think we most often relate to distance learning, and that's online instruction. So online instruction can be synchronous. Those are those whole class or small group meetings via video conference usually, and they can be great for real-time connections with classmates and with teachers, but might not always be accessible or motivating, and sometimes hard for kids to get the support they need to get on at the right time. Online instruction can also be asynchronous, which just meaning not at the same time. So that's like recorded materials that are sent out to students or online activities or apps. So there's more flexibility there, but it still might not be accessible or motivating to students. And then we also lose the connection with teachers and peers. I think that some of the things that are not always considered as part of distance learning are some of the things that are below those that online instruction row. So some of our distance learning activities can be those interactive hands-on activities where kids are asked to make something, build something, act something out, play a game with a family member at home that reinforces a concept. And those are things that are also part of the program but aren't always kind of considered that we can kind of advocate for or start to design and embed in students' programs. We also need to consider ways that school can work very closely together with family members to provide some coaching, parent training, and really to work on collaboratively designing students' programs together rather than having everything be only one direction. So nationally, there has been kind of an explosion of information and resources, some of which is really wonderful and helpful, but often kind of difficult for families to navigate. There's so much going on. Here is a little bit of a summary of what we know so far about strong distance learning programs, or some key components. And really what this is a list of what we already know are evidence-based practices for serving students with disabilities. And then this is just taking those and applying them specifically to distance learning. So you can see access to meaningful instruction in the context of home and community routines. That means that we really want to consider how students are going to apply skills in the environments where they're participating right now. We also want to address access to general education curriculum and activities, just like when we're in school in person, that access to general education remains important. And I would argue it's actually more important during this time because students are at a greater risk for isolation at this time. These programs require a high level of collaboration, coordination, and transdisciplinary teaming, because we really can't be working in isolation. So if we have teachers and service providers kind of providing separate and disconnected services, then it's going to be even harder for family members and particularly for students to integrate those in a meaningful way into the students' daily routines. So those services like language and speech, occupational therapy, really need to be integrated together into any whole class or small group activities that students are doing when they're doing live instruction, and should also be integrated into any meetings between family and school where we're planning out a program. Communication and literacy instruction should be embedded into everything that students are doing during this time, because those are some of the most critical skills that they need to maintain during this period without in-person school. Progress monitoring and formative assessment remain important in terms of continuing to kind of gauge where students are at, where they might be struggling most, so that we can refine their program and work together between families and teachers to keep improving. Social supports and relationship building need to be part of a student's kind of program from the beginning. A focus on self-determination, or the ability to have some kind of say and control over important things that happen to you in your life. Topics should be age appropriate and also adjusted as needed in their format or their complexity based on the individual student skills. And then finally, kind of the crux of any distance learning program really needs to be close collaboration with families so that the program can be tailored, starting with our long-term goals for the student. So the easiest way for you to access kind of tools and practical resources that I'm going to talk about today is through Padlet. And the Padlet link is listed here, and also can be accessed through the code, the scan code that's on the screen, by just holding your camera up to the screen, and then a little link should pop up in the window. So this is the Padlet, and you can see that there's tons of resources on here. Most of the things that I'm going to focus on today are in this very left column, focused on guidelines for distance learning programs. But you can see there's also some resources for progress monitoring. And then I'm also going to refer to some other webinars or trainings that are available for free here as well. So because distance learning is so hard, and because there are so many things that we really need to be accomplishing during this time, collaborating really is the only option. We can't do this in isolation. So key steps to make this work is, first, identify some clear goals as a team, establish some clarity around everybody's roles and responsibilities for the student's program. There should be regular meeting times, and that means kind of like video conference meeting, preferably, not just email, because it's better to be able to problem solve in real time, and email is just not the most efficient way to do that. And then together with that team supporting the student, we need to keep adjusting and revising the program, because everybody is figuring this out as we go along, and we have to have a structure for problem solving. So one of the tools that a team and I have put together to kind of work on giving these collaborative teams a kind of tangible plan is called a distance learning support plan. So there's a template for this in English and Spanish available on the Padlet, and these are kind of some of the basic questions. So when we start off with the family, we really just talk about who at home is going to be assisting with distance learning, what teachers or staff members are involved. We want to find out, just like the survey, what families' current hopes are, what their greatest concerns are, and what types of support would be most useful. And then finally, just talking through what a typical day looks like in the home, so that the school's supports can really support application within the school day, rather than creating completely separate activities. Another tool that is on the Padlet that we've found to be very, very useful is really a tool that's been around for a long time called a goal activity matrix. Now, this version is one that was refined by TLC Charter School, and they really started to take this a step further in terms of not just connecting goals to activities, but also to identifying specific support strategies to help students to access their distance learning program, and what data will be collected so that they can continue to monitor progress. So those goals are developed through the family support plan process. So we don't necessarily identify every goal on the student's IEP, but really work on prioritizing a few goals that we think are most essential for the next few weeks, and then we can always add more or revise more the next time we meet. The activities are identified by the general ed and special ed teachers, as well as related service providers and paraprofessionals. It's a way that we can plan for what's coming up and how we can connect those goals to the activities. So the support strategies that are listed also help us to identify which adults are responsible to kind of implement those supports. So if materials or adjustments need to be made, then those adults know what their role is. And then finally, the data collection, and as well as who those initials that are following on that piece are who's going to be responsible for collecting that data. Okay, so now let's get to some ideas and strategies. So the first idea is really a pretty big concept, and it's the idea that any distance learning program should really be considering all students from the beginning. So before we focus on accessibility for just one student, we should be thinking about what would it look like if our distance learning program really was much more broadly accessible. So this concept called universal design for learning is really based around the idea that if we give students flexible options and we incorporate a lot of different ways of providing instruction, that more students will be able to access their learning. So it's universal design for learning. And this framework is also built around these kind of three core concepts: that we need to represent or convey information in many different ways. Students need to be able to express what they're learning in many ways. And then we need to consider engagement, or ways to motivate students to participate within everything we do as well. So you can see for live class sessions, some ideas here are really keeping sessions short, bringing in household items as manipulatives, kind of getting kids to kind of get their hands kind of moving and touching things, using some really engaging visuals like Google Earth or virtual field trips, and then giving students lots of ways to express what they are learning or to give feedback on their learning. So there's lots of different ways to do that, from kind of options that are technical, like using a whiteboard tool where they can create or draw something on their screen. Apps like Flipgrid is a way they can quickly record themselves doing something or response. But it can also be pretty low tech, like just having all kids do something physically in response to a question. And the nice thing about video conference platforms is that sometimes you can just expand so that you can see everybody at once, so then you can see and respond in real time. And then there's lots of different ways that teachers are getting creative in terms of engaging students. So having spirit days, engaging some interactive games, just simply using novelty. I've seen teachers coming on to a live class session dressed as Mario from the video game to talk about our controlled vowels, and also just ensuring that in every class session that we're really encouraging and facilitating social connection and social interaction. So these are just some examples of what would be considered asynchronous or not live instruction types of activities. So on the top are a few things that are a little bit more traditional. So we have a recorded video demonstrating a multiplication problem, And the app, iXL, is an app that it provides math practice. One nice thing about that app is that it can be scaffolded so that if students are working on maybe a sixth grade math activity, you can actually go and look at younger grade levels and it will align with what everybody else is doing. So I can align my sixth graders' work with what the general education class is doing, even if they're working at a lower level, they can be working on the same or similar concept. On the bottom are some things that I've seen posted recently from friends and family with different things that their kids are doing asynchronously. So on the far left is they had to recreate some famous pieces of art using materials they had in their house. In the middle is a transitional kindergartner who is he's building something where he has to bring in small objects or pictures that start with the letter of their week. And then on the bottom right is a middle school activity where students are learning about integers and they have to play a game using cards focused on positive and negative numbers. So particularly those things that are on the bottom really promote a lot more accessibility for students because they're not focused on such specific academic skills that they can't be easily adapted by families and are clearly much more engaging for students than just doing work on a two-dimensional screen. So universal design provides that overview of accessibility, but we know that for some students that really is not enough, and we need to individualize or tailor instruction a little bit further. So we started with that family support plan, and that's a way to really identify what the individualized adaptations will be for each student's distance learning plan. That's where we can prioritize key content and skills and determine what those tailored materials will be. So for example, do we need to adjust the difficulty of certain activities or assignments? Do we need to provide some alternate or related activities because another activity is not going to be accessible? So we might consider the amount of work, the difficulty of assignments, as well as adapting for the level of support that a student might need. And then we want to connect those IEP goals to both those synchronous and asynchronous activities. So another aspect that we might consider in terms of accessibility for students with disabilities during distance learning is how students can participate in those live class sessions. So I've heard a lot of stories about classes moving quickly, teachers leading most of the instructions. There's not a lot of opportunities for participation. And when there are, really it's happening so fast that students with disabilities really don't have the opportunity to kind of get themselves into the flow of the class. So we do have a whole webinar that's posted on the Padlet focused just on strategies for participation in online class meetings. So here's some features of those, and I'll give 2 examples, but then I also want to encourage you to go to that webinar for a little bit more. So things that we want to consider for participation is that there should be predictable and consistent ways for students to participate that support independence and also help them to anticipate the routines of an online class. These strategies should contribute to the lesson or activity, not detract from it. They should be things that a student finds engaging and interesting. They should be focused on those skills that we want to prioritize for students related to their IEP goals. The idea is to promote belonging and interdependence, to connect to IEP goals, to be respectful of the learner, and also consider their unique needs. So here's one example. This is just the idea of choosing what we call brain breaks. So when kids have been online, sitting, watching the screen for a little while, sometimes it's nice to kind of mix it up. And one way they can mix it up is to have a student who might be a target student, somebody who needs some more individualized support, draw a stick or do something kind of tangible they have at home, and then tell the class what it is that they chose. So, and each of those sticks has some kind of quick movement break or something that kids can do to kind of wiggle for a few minutes or dance or do a dab or a movement, and then they get back to work. So it can be using sticks. They can also select a choice using a communication board or using a digital choice board. Okay, so in this activity, we're really focused a little bit more on that academic participation, and we're focused on how a student can support the class by repeating or embedding a particular sentence or a big idea to emphasize for the whole group. So the example here is a literacy example in the picture, but it really could be for math, science, social studies, or any other curricular area. So the teachers have pre-selected a key idea and made sure that the family members knows what that is. So on the example here, that key idea is highlighted on the screen for all students to see, and it's purple. And that is a line that might be on every page as teachers are reading or sharing their screen. And then on a recordable button at home, or a student can read aloud that same sentence whenever the teacher's ready to kind of re-emphasize. So as we're talking about the Revolutionary War and the students are reading a more lengthy text focused on a specific battle, a teacher might ask a target student to read a more simple sentence that really emphasizes the big idea. So the example here is that colonists were scared to fight the strong British army. And the student might be asked to read this sentence several times throughout the lesson, which gives the student repeated practice and also helps the rest of the class to not get lost in the details, to really remember what that big idea was that we're going to go back to. So the student could read the sentence aloud, they could have it recorded, they could have a recording on their screen, or could even choose a peer to read that sentence for them. So it's really about repetitive reading practice, developing confidence reading, responding when being called on with a prepared response, and just reinforcing the main idea. So the last piece of the puzzle that I wanted to address is really just focused on social connections for our students. We know that for many students with disabilities, before coronavirus hit, before we started distance learning, most of their social interactions for many students took place at school. And without the opportunity for in-person interactions, many students are becoming more isolated from their peers. So it really is the responsibility of educators to create more opportunities within any of our in-person sessions to facilitate interactions. But it does take some strategy and some facilitation. So we can start with just having some fun, common experiences. So one of those is like dance parties, and I know some classes that have earned Friday dance parties in elementary school, costume parties where everybody's asked to find something at home to represent a certain concept or idea, school spirit days in middle school and high school where everybody's encouraged to, like I said earlier, wear crazy socks or wear a crazy hat. Those are all ways that students can feel like they're participating in something together and having common experiences. It also gives us something to talk about when we engage in smaller group activities with friends. So one of the hard things is conversation, right? And using language to talk about things. So whether a student uses verbal language or uses a communication device, we need to make sure we have topics or things to say. So once we have those common experiences, then we can work on embedding more small group activities with peers, getting them together to work on specific tasks or working on completing a game together, but really in a smaller group, because it's going to be much easier to participate and engage in turn taking in a smaller group than it is in a whole class session. We can have students do projects where they're paired with one other student, so then they can really work on some more sustained opportunities for interaction. And then finally, lunch bunch and clubs have been a great way for kids to kind of check in with each other and have some kind of casual time together. I know that the bottom left here has a group of students who are in middle school and have been participating in a lunch bunch since the beginning of distance learning. They kind of just talk about what's going on, what's coming up. Finn on the right-hand side is an AAC user who is still learning some aspects of using his communication device, although he does great, but has some support from mom to participate. And with the facilitation of their teacher, this has been a very positive experience. There's a webinar that's also available on the Padlet called Support Strategies from Teachers, and that has a video clip of those students in their lunch bunch. All right, so that has been our quick run through of strategies and ideas for distance learning. I know that it's hard, but I do believe that we can do this, and we have to believe that we can do this because that's the only way we're going to get through this together. So I want to wish you lots of luck. My email is there if you have any questions or need access to any of the resources that I've shared. Please check out the Padlet or feel free to email me. All right, goodbye.